Abby Whitaker dropped into her knees in the dirt and clawed at the belongings the town had thrown into the street, and not one door opened. Not one soul stepped forward. A widow alone, branded a liar, and a fire-setter condemned without a trial, without a witness, without mercy. But a mountain cowboy was riding down from the high country, and before that summer sun went down, he'd make a vow that silenced the whole street cold. Before we begin, subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled. The trunk hit the dirt first and it burst open like a body. Abby Whitaker watched her dead husband's shirts spill across the dust of Cedar Hollow's Main Street, watched the wind take the collar of the one she'd sewn him, the winter before the fever took him, and for one long breath she could not move. Then she went down. Down onto her knees in the road, where every decent woman in that town had once nodded to her, and she gathered the cloth to her chest like it was a child somebody meant to drown. "Leave it in the dirt where it belongs," said Silas Bramwell. He stood on the boardwalk above her with his thumbs hooked in his vest, polished and easy, the way a man stands when he owns the ground under everybody's feet. Behind him, the whole town had gathered the way crowds do, not to help, never to help, only to watch, and to feel clean about themselves while a woman bled. Abby looked up at him. Her face was streaked with dust, and something worse than dust. "It belongs to me, Mr. Bramwell," she said. Her voice shook. She hated that it shook. "Same as it did yesterday when you tipped your hat to me on this same street and called me a fine, honest woman. That was before you burned my storehouse. I never touched your storehouse. Folks saw the smoke." Bramwell smiled. He had a good smile. That was the terrible thing about him. It was a good smile, warm and patient, and it had buried more people than the town's whole cemetery. Folks saw a bitter woman dismissed from honest work, and the very same night my barrels of seed oil go up in flames. A man doesn't need to be clever to add that sum, Mrs. Whitaker. A child could add it. The crowd murmured. It was the murmur Abby had learned to dread, low satisfied, the sound of 100 small cowards agreeing all at once so that no single one of them had to own the cruelty. She got to her feet. She made herself do it slow with her chin up, the way her mother had taught her a woman stands when the floor is gone out from under her. "I'll say it again so the whole street hears it," Abby said, and she turned not to Bramwell but to the people. To Hattie Combs from the dry goods, to the Pruitt sisters, to the men who'd carried her husband's coffin not 11 months past. The night before that fire, I saw 2 of Mr. Bramwell's riders rolling barrels off a wagon behind the storehouse, after dark, with no lantern. I saw it with my own eyes from the road, and I'll swear it on my husband's grave. Silence. Then a woman's voice, thin and mean. She'd swear to anything now. Course she would. "My Thomas is dead," Abby said, and her voice cracked clean down the middle. 11 months in the ground, and I have buried him, and I have grieved him, and I have asked nothing of this town but the right to earn my bread with my own 2 hands. And you would put a torch in those hands because a rich man told you to. That's enough." Sheriff Dale Mercer came down off the boardwalk, hitching his belt, not meeting her eyes. He was not a cruel man, Mercer. He was something more common and more useful to men like Bramwell. He was a tired one. "Mrs. Whitaker, I got no cause to arrest you and no cause to keep you. But I'll tell you plain, this town's made up its mind, and a town's mind is a hard thing to argue with. Best thing you can do is take the afternoon coach south and start fresh somewhere folks don't know your business." "My business?" Abby repeated. "You know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean, Sheriff." She pulled the shirt tighter against her chest. "You mean it's easier to be rid of one widow than to call a wealthy man a liar." Mercer's jaw worked. He looked at the dust. "Coach leaves at 4. Bramwell descended the steps, then slow, generous a man bestowing his presence. He stopped a careful distance from her, close enough for the crowd, far enough that no one could later say he'd laid a hand on her. "I'll even spare you the fare," he said softly, only for her, his good smile fixed in place. $1.40. Call it Christian charity. Get on the coach, Abby. Go far. And no one will ever have to know what you did." I did nothing. They believe you did. He leaned a fraction closer. The smile never moved. And in this country, dear woman, that is precisely the same thing. You'd do well to learn it before it costs you more than a coach seat. For a moment, one ugly honest moment, Abby believed she would do it. She would pick up what they'd thrown in the road, and she would get on the coach, and she would let this town swallow her whole, the way it had swallowed her husband, the way the high country swallowed the snow. And that was when the horses came down off the mountain trail. He came in slow. A man in a hurry tells you he's afraid of something. A man who comes in slow tells you he's never been afraid of anything yet and doesn't expect to start. The cowboy rode down the north trail at a walk, a big bay gelding under him and a pack horse behind, and he was the largest man most of them had ever seen sit a saddle. Broad through the shoulders as a barn door, sun-blacked, his hat brim low and his eyes lower, and when he drew rein at the edge of the crowd, the murmur died like somebody had pinched the wick. Nobody spoke to him. Mountain men came down twice a season for salt and flour and went back up, and this one nobody knew by anything but reputation. Rourke, who ran cattle on the high grass where nobody else dared, who'd never owed a man $1 nor asked one a favor. Caleb Rourke sat his horse and looked at the street. He looked at the burst trunk, at the shirts in the dust, at the woman standing in the middle of it with her chin up and her eyes wet and her arms full of a dead man's clothes. He looked at the wall of faces that had made themselves into a wall. He looked at the rich man with the good smile. And something in his face which had not moved the whole ride down went very still. He swung down. The saddle leather creaked. He was even bigger on the ground. Afternoon. He said to no one and everyone and touched his hat brim. Not to Bramwell, the crowd noticed. To the woman. He touched his hat to the woman in the dirt. You'll want to move along, friend, Bramwell said pleasantly. This is town business. Sad business, but town business. Caleb didn't look at him. He walked past him, walked past Silas Bramwell as if he were a fence post, and stopped in front of Abby, and even she, who had nothing left to be afraid of, took a half step back from the sheer size of him. Ma'am, he said. Sir. Her voice was a thread. These yours? He nodded at the things in the road. They were my husband's. He comin' for 'em? He's dead. Caleb nodded slowly, like that answered a question he'd already half known. He crouched, the big man folding down to one knee in the dust, and picked up the collar that had blown loose the one she'd sewn, and he looked at the stitching for a moment with a strange and quiet attention. Then he stood and held it out to her. Fine work, he said. Whoever made it. Abby took it. Her hand was shaking. His was not. I made it, she whispered. Figured. Mr. Rourke. Bramwell's voice had cooled exactly 1 degree. I don't believe you understand the situation. This woman is a known fire setter. She destroyed $300 of my property out of spite. The town has asked her to leave for everyone's safety, and the sheriff has agreed. I'd be obliged if you wouldn't interfere in a matter that's settled. Caleb turned finally and looked at him. He took his time about it. Settled, he said. Quite. You got a paper says she done it. I beg your pardon? A paper. A judge's hand. A jury. Caleb's voice was low and unhurried, and it carried clear to the back of the crowd the way a low voice carries when everything else has gone quiet. Where I come from, a thing's settled when the law settles it. Down here I reckon it's settled when the man with the most money says the word. That about right. The crowd shifted. Somebody coughed. Bramwell's smile thinned. You're a stranger here, Rourke. You don't know her. No, Caleb agreed. I don't. He looked back at Abby, and his voice gentled, but it gentled the way granite gentles, still hard underneath, only worn smooth where it touched her. But I know what a town looks like when it's decided to be rid of somebody. Seen it before. Seen it done to my own mother, matter of fact, when I was a boy too small to do a thing but watch. A beat. A dead level beat. I ain't a boy now. He turned to the crowd. Anybody here see her light that fire? Anybody with your own 2 eyes, not what you heard, not what you reckoned, not what this man told you to believe. Anybody here see it done? No hand, no voice. 100 people, and not one of them could meet the eyes of a stranger. "That's what I figured," Caleb said quietly. Bramwell recovered fast. "Men like him always did." "This is touching," he said, spreading his hands to the crowd, inviting them to laugh, and a few obliged him, the way they always obliged him. "A mountain man rides down off his rock once a season and decides he knows our town better than we do. Mr. Rourke, by all means be charitable. There's the afternoon coach. Buy the woman a ticket. Salve your conscience, but she does not stay in Cedar Hollow, and that is the end of it." "You're right," Caleb said. The crowd went still again, uncertain. Bramwell blinked. "She don't stay in your town." Caleb walked back to his horse, unlooped a coil of his pack horse's lead, and led the animal forward until it stood beside Abby. "She rides up the mountain with me." A woman gasped. Then the murmur came up roaring, not a murmur anymore, a noise ugly and delighted, the sound a crowd makes when it's been handed something to be scandalized about. Abby felt the heat climb her neck. "No," she said. Caleb turned. "I won't," she said louder, and her voice steadied now that there was something to push against. "I thank you, sir, I do, but I won't go up a mountain to be some stranger's charity. I have buried a husband. I have lost my work and my name, and the trunk of his clothes is lying in the road. I will not lose the last thing I've got, which is the right to refuse a man's pity." Her eyes burned. "I'd sooner walk south on my own 2 feet than ride anywhere on it." For a moment, the big man just looked at her, and something passed over his weathered face. Not offense. Respect, maybe. The look a man gives a thing tougher than it had any right to be. "Pity," he said. "Yes, ma'am." He set his hands on his hips. "Pity leaves a person in the dirt and tips its hat and rides off feeling fine about itself. Pity is what every soul on this street is doing to you right now. I ain't offering you pity." He gestured at the road, at the burst trunk, at the wall of faces. "I'm offering you a road out of this. There's a difference, and I reckon a woman smart enough to throw it back in my face is smart enough to know it." Abby's breath caught. "You don't know me," she said. "You keep telling me that. You don't know what they say I did." "I know what they can prove," Caleb said, "which is nothing. And I know a man who builds his fortune off frightening widows out of town generally has a reason for it." He looked at Bramwell when he said it, and Bramwell's smile died entirely. "You want to be careful, Rourke," the cattle broker said very softly, now the warmth all gone out of him at last, and the cold underneath showing through. "Up on that mountain you run cattle, and cattle need water, and the only reliable crossing between your grass and the river runs through deeded land. My deeded land." He let that sit. It would be a hard thing come the dry of summer for a man to find that crossing closed to him. Hard on the cattle, hard on the man. You'd want to think real careful before you make an enemy over a woman you met 4 minutes ago. The crowd sucked in its breath. Everyone in Cedar Hollow knew what that threat meant. To close a man's water in high summer was to kill him slow. Abby felt her stomach drop. She turned to Caleb. "Mr. Rourke." "Don't," he said gently. Then to Bramwell. "You'd do that. Close my water. Starve my herd. To run one widow out of a town she never harmed. I'd do considerably more than that. I believe you would." Caleb nodded slow, taking it in, weighing it the way a man weighs feed against winter. And then he did the thing none of them ever forgot, the thing they told their grandchildren about, the thing that turned Cedar Hollow's afternoon clean on its head. He took off his hat. He held it against his chest, and he turned to Abigail Whitaker, not to the crowd, not to the rich man, to her, and he spoke loud and plain so that every soul on that street would carry it home. "Then I'll say it where they can all hear it," Caleb Rourke said. "So there's no mistaking it later. You are no man's charity, ma'am, and you'll be no man's charity on my mountain. You'll ride up there as my intended before God and this whole street, and we'll be wed proper the first Sunday a preacher comes through. I'll give you my name, which is clean, and a roof that's mine, and owes no man $1. His voice dropped, and it didn't shake at all. "And I'll make you a vow here in the dirt where they threw you down. By winter, you'll have my son growing inside you, and a home no town and no rich man and no whisper on God's earth can ever take from you again." You could have heard a feather fall. Abby stared at him. Her mouth opened. Nothing came. "You're," she managed. We've spoke 6 sentences." "I know it." He kept the hat against his chest. His eyes never left her face. "And I know how it sounds. A man my size talking like that to a woman in the road. But I've been alone on that mountain 11 years, ma'am, and I have watched good people get buried under the lies of bad ones. And I have promised myself I'd never stand and watch it happen again, so long as I had 2 legs to stand on. So, I'm not standing." He took 1 step closer, and his voice gentled to almost nothing just for her. "I'm offering you everything I've got. A name. A home. A future no one can burn. You can throw it back. You've earned the right to throw any man's anything back. But it ain't pity, and I'd be obliged if you'd believe that much, even if you believe nothing else." For a long moment, Abby Whitaker did not move. The town watched. Bramwell watched his face working through something fast and dark. The sheriff watched with his thumbs in his belt and an expression that might have been shame. And Abby looked at the big quiet man holding his hat against his chest, and she thought of her husband Thomas, dead in the cold ground, who had also been a quiet man, who had also never wasted a word, who had married her when her own father called her plain and stubborn, and likely to die alone. She thought of how this town had carried Thomas's coffin and then turned its back on his widow inside a year. She thought of the coach at 4 o'clock and the long road south to a nowhere full of strangers who'd find some new reason to throw her things in some new road. And she thought, "I am so tired of being thrown down." "They'll say I'm a fallen woman," she said quietly. "Riding off with a man I never met." "They're already saying you're an arsonist," Caleb said. "Reckon they'll say whatever's cruelest. Always do. Question ain't what they'll say. Question's what's true. And what's true is you'll have a roof tonight and a name by Sunday, and not one of these folks gets a vote in it. And your water." Her voice shook again, but different now. "He'll close your water. You heard him. You'll lose your herd, your whole living, over a woman you—" "That's my account to settle," Caleb said. "Not yours. You don't owe me your worry, ma'am. You don't owe me a thing. I'm asking. I'm not collecting." Bramwell stepped forward then. "This is madness. Rourke, you'll ruin yourself." "Mr. Bramwell?" Abby's head came up. She had not meant to say it. The words came up out of some place under all the grief and the dust and the 11 months of being small, some old hard place she'd thought the fever in the town had burned out of her. "You stood on that boardwalk," she said, "and you smiled at me, and you threw my dead husband's shirts in the road, and you told this whole street I was a liar and a danger to honest folk. And not one of them asked you for proof because they're frightened of you, every last one. Well." She took the lead rope of the pack horse from Caleb's hand. Her fingers were steady now. "I'm a widow with nothing left to lose, Mr. Bramwell, and I've learned today that's a more dangerous thing than you reckoned. So you go ahead and close his water. You go ahead and do your worst to a man whose only crime was tipping his hat to me. And while you're at it, you think hard on the 2 riders I saw behind your storehouse the night before it burned. Because I know their faces. And one day, God willing, I'll be standing somewhere a man like you can't reach, and I'll say those faces out loud." The cattle broker's good smile was entirely gone. "You'll regret that," he said softly. "I've buried a husband, sir." Abby looked him dead in the eye. "There's not much left in this world you can teach me about regret." She turned her back on him. She turned her back on Silas Bramwell and the sheriff and the Pruitt sisters and Hattie Combs and the whole gathered town of Cedar Hollow, and she gathered her husband's shirts out of the dust one by one, slow with what dignity a person can find on their knees in a road. Caleb Rourke crouched beside her without a word, and gathered the rest, and his big hands were gentle with the cloth. And he did not say a thing about the tears that fell on the linen, and that not the vow, not the size of him, not the standing up to Bramwell. That was the moment Abby Whitaker decided she would go up the mountain. A man who keeps quiet while a woman cries and just keeps picking up her dead husband's shirts. That was a thing she could trust. That was a thing she understood. They packed the trunk back together. He lashed it to the pack horse. He led the bay around and held the stirrup for her, And when she hesitated, 1 foot in the iron, her whole life behind her, in a town that hated her, he said low, "Just for her. You don't have to mean the vow yet, ma'am. I'll not lay a hand on you. You don't ask me to. You ride up that mountain as my guest till the day you decide otherwise. And if that day's never then, it's never, and you'll still have a roof. The vow stands the second you want it, and not 1 second before. I only said it loud so they'd have to leave you be." A pause. "But I'll tell you true, I meant every word." Abby looked down at him from the saddle. The whole street was watching. The sun was sliding down toward the western ridges, and the dust hung gold in the late light. "Why?" she said. "Why me? Why today?" And Caleb Rourke, who never wasted words, looked up at the widow on his horse and gave her more of them than he'd given any living soul in 11 years. "Because when that trunk burst open in the road," he said, "and your man's shirts went in the dirt, you got down on your knees to save him. Not your own things, his. A dead man's shirts." He swallowed. "A woman who'll kneel in the dirt of a town that hates her to save the last of a man she loved. That's a woman worth losing my water over, ma'am. That's a woman worth a whole mountain." He set his hat back on his head and touched the brim. "Reckon that was worth riding back for." He swung up onto the pack horse, and Abigail Whitaker rode out of Cedar Hollow at the side of a man she'd known 1 hour, with her dead husband's shirts behind her and her chin up, and the whole cruel town silent at her back. Not because she had been rescued, but because for the first time in 11 months, somebody had looked at her and seen not a fallen woman, not a widow, not an arsonist, not a problem to be coached south at 4 o'clock. He had seen a woman worth riding back for. Behind them in the gold and the dust, Silas Bramwell stood very still on the empty street and watched them climb the north trail toward the high country. His hands had curled into fists at his sides, and the polished, patient, terrible smile came slowly back onto his face, because Silas Bramwell had spent his whole life learning one lesson above all others, and he had never once known it to fail him. Everything a man loves can be taken from him, and a mountain, he thought, watching them go a mountain, is a very long way from water. The mountain did not welcome her, and Abby was glad of it. She had expected somewhere in the long climb through the pines that Caleb Rourke would soften once the town was out of sight, that the size of him and the gentleness of him would curdle into the thing she'd learned to watch for in men, the part that wanted paying back. But when they reached the cabin in the last gold of evening, he didn't carry her down off the horse, or fuss over her, or speak a word about the vow he'd made in the dirt of Cedar Hollow. He swung down, unlashed her trunk, set it inside the door, and pointed. "Loft's yours," he said. "Ladder pulls up if you've a mind. I sleep down here by the stove, and I'll sleep down here by the stove, till the day you tell me different, which may be never, and that's no business of mine. Privy's out back, water barrels by the door. You hungry?" Abby stood in the middle of his cabin with her arms wrapped around herself. "I won't eat a man's food I haven't earned." "Didn't ask you to." He set a pan on the stove. "I asked, were you hungry?" "Mr. Rourke." "Caleb." "Mr. Rourke." She lifted her chin. "I need to know what you expect of me. I'll not lie awake all night wondering, so say it plain. What does a woman owe a man who buys her off the street?" He stopped with the pan in his hand. He looked at her a long moment, and there was no offense in his face, only a kind of tiredness, like she'd asked him a question. He'd been asked his whole life by people who couldn't believe a thing could be given without a hook in it. "You owe me work," he said, "if you want to feel square, which I reckon you do, being the kind you are. There's torn saddle blankets in that corner, been needing a hand with a needle for 2 years. There's a smokehouse out back so disorganized I can't find my own salt pork. There's a winter coming that don't care how lonesome I am, and a root cellar to fill before it gets here." He set the pan down. "You want to earn your bread, Mrs. Whitaker? There's a mountain of bread to earn. But you don't owe me your gratitude, and you don't owe me your body, and you don't owe me a smile. You don't feel. Anybody told you a woman owes those things? They lied to you, same as that town lied about the fire." Abby's throat went tight. She had braced herself so hard for the other thing that the plainness of it nearly undid her. "All right," she said. "All right." He agreed and went back to the pan. She started on the saddle blankets at first light, because she could not sit still, and she could not bear to be in his debt 1 hour longer than she had to. She found his needle dull bent, a man's idea of a needle, and threw it out the door, and used her own, the good steel she'd carried from town, in the lining of her dress, because it was the one thing she'd be damned before she'd let them take. He found her at it mid-morning. He stood in the door and watched her hands move, the way he'd watched the stitching of Thomas's collar in the road, with that strange, quiet attention. "You sew like that for the town," he said. "And they still threw you out." "I sewed like this for the town?" Abby said without looking up. "And Mrs. Pruitt wore my work to church every Sunday for 3 years, and the morning after the fire she crossed the street so she wouldn't have to walk past me." The needle flashed. "Fine stitching counts for nothing against a frightened crowd, Mr. Rourke. I learned that for free." "Caleb, I know what you said." He almost smiled. She saw it happen and not happen the corner of his mouth, and she went back to the blanket so he wouldn't see her notice. The first week passed like that. She worked from dark to dark, and he let her, and she watched him for the hook, the price, the moment the kindness turned, and it didn't come. He didn't speak much. When he did, it was to the point. She found to her own irritation that she had begun to wait for the sound of his boots. She buried that. She buried it deep next to Thomas where it couldn't get loose and hurt her. The trouble came up the trail on the 8th day, and it came in a familiar shape. Abby was at the smokehouse when she heard the horse and froze with a slab of bacon in her hands because she knew that gait. She'd watched it for 3 years on the streets of Cedar Hollow. She set the bacon down slow, and she went to the corner of the smokehouse, and she looked, and her blood went to ice. It was one of them. One of the 2 men she'd seen rolling barrels behind the storehouse in the dark. She knew the slope of his shoulders. She knew the way he sat a horse all wrong, like a man who'd learned riding late and hated it. He'd ridden halfway up the trail, just to the edge of Caleb's grass, and he sat there now, watching the cabin, doing nothing, which was the most frightening thing he could have done. She found Caleb at the corral. "There's a man on your trail." He didn't stop what he was doing. "There's been a man on my trail 4 days running. Different men. They take turns." "You knew." "I know everything that walks on my mountain, Mrs. Whitaker. It's how a man stays alive up here." He looped a rope. "They don't come past the line. They just sit and watch and let you see 'em watching. It's meant to scare you. Bramwell figures you'll panic and run, and then he's got you off my land and back where he can reach you, and it costs him nothing." He looked at her. "It's working some, I see. Your hands are shaking." She put them behind her back. "I know that man." Now he stopped. "That one down there?" she said. "I know him. He's one of the 2 I saw behind the storehouse. The barrels. I'd swear to it in any court in the territory." Her voice climbed. "Caleb, he's one of them." "You're sure?" "I sewed a button on his coat once in the shop before all this. I know the set of his shoulders like I know my own name. That's Del Harmon, and he rolled oil barrels in the dark the night before Bramwell's storehouse burned, and now he's sitting on your mountain watching me." She was breathing hard. Why would Bramwell send the very man, the one witness who could hang him? Why send him up here where I'd see him? Caleb was quiet a moment. "Because Bramwell don't believe you'll ever get to a court," he said slowly. "He don't believe a soul on God's earth will ever take the word of a widow arsonist over a rich man. So it costs him nothing to let you see Del Harmon's face. You can know the truth all you want. Knowing ain't proving." He set the rope down. "That's how men like him win. They let you carry the truth around like a stone in your pocket till it breaks your back, and they smile the whole time, because they know you can't ever set it down in front of anybody who'll listen." Abby stared down the trail at Del Harmon, who sat his horse and watched her, and she felt the truth turn in her pocket like a stone. "Then I'll make somebody listen," she said. Caleb looked at her. "I mean it." She turned to him, and something had come up in her face that hadn't been there in the road in Cedar Hollow, something harder and cleaner. "I have spent 11 months being small, being grateful, being quiet, burying my husband, and burying my work, and burying my name, and burying every word I wanted to say. I'm done burying. I don't want your roof so I can hide under it, Mr. Rourke. I want my name back. I want that man and the one rode beside him and Silas Bramwell standing in front of a judge, and I want to be the one points the finger." Her voice cracked, but it didn't break. "Can you understand that it isn't enough to be safe? I want it back. All of it. My name. Out loud." For a long moment, Caleb Rourke just looked at the widow standing in his yard with her fists clenched and her eyes wet and fierce. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "I can understand that fine." He'd been understanding it for 4 days, it turned out. He just hadn't told her. He showed her that evening, after Del Harmon had melted back down the trail the way they always did before dark. He brought her to the lean-to, where he kept his saddle and tack, and he pulled out a saddlebag and laid 3 things on the workbench, careful like a man laying out cards. A shard of charred barrel staved the iron hoop still clinging to it. A square of canvas scorched at one edge with a wagon maker's mark stamped into the corner. And a page. A half-burned page of a ledger, the bottom third gone to ash, the top curled and brown, but the ink still readable. "Where?" Abby breathed. "Dry creek bed about a mile below the storehouse," Caleb said. "Day after we rode up. I went down quiet before Light looked at the burn from the backside where the town don't bother to look. Found wagon tracks deep enough to mean a heavy load, running away from the storehouse, not toward it. Found these barrel staves shoved under brush a 1/4 mile off where a man would dump 'em if he wanted folks to think they'd burned up inside." He tapped the canvas. "And this caught on a thorn bush. Wagon cover. You said you'd seen the mark on Bramwell's supply wagons." "That the one?" Abby picked it up. Her hands were not quite steady. She turned the canvas to the light and found the stamp a wheel inside a diamond, and she knew it the way she knew Del Harmon's shoulders. "That's his," she whispered. "That's Bramwell's freight mark. I've seen it 100 times. He stencils it on everything he owns." She looked up. "Caleb, this is proof. Wagon tracks running away. His barrels dumped where they'd never burn. His freight cover at the creek. It's a start," he said. "It ain't proof. A clever lawyer says any man could have stole a barrel, any wagon's got a cover, any thornbush snags, any cloth. We need a thing nobody can talk around. We need a thing that puts Silas Bramwell's own hand in the fire." He turned the ledger page toward her. "And I think this is it. Only I can't read it the way it wants reading. You worked his accounts in town." "No, I." She bent over the page. "I cleaned for the freight office. I dusted. She stopped. She went very still. Caleb watched her face change. "These are brand marks," Abby said slowly. Her finger hovered over the page, not touching it. "These columns. These aren't accounts. They're tally marks of cattle by brand. Look, Bar T, Lazy K, the Crowfoot that's Old Man Eustace's. And here." Her finger stopped. "Here's the same head of cattle, the same number, the same date, written twice. Once under Crowfoot, and once again 3 lines down under Bramwell's own brand." The lean-to was very quiet. "He's writing other men's cattle into his own books," Abby said, and her voice had dropped to almost nothing. "Brand by brand. He buys 100 head off Eustace, he tallies them under his mark, but he leaves them on Eustace's tally too, so the books say there's 200 where there's 1. And then..." The understanding moved across her face like cold water. "And then he insures them. He insures cattle that don't exist against the cattle that do. Floods, fever, drought, every dead steer pays him twice because half of them only ever lived on paper." She looked up at Caleb White. "The storehouse didn't burn for spite. It burned to kill these, the real tallies, the proof. He set the fire to burn his own books before somebody added the columns the way I just did." Caleb's jaw was set hard. "And you were standing in the road that night." "I was walking home from the shop." Her hand had come up to her mouth. "I saw 2 men rolling barrels in the dark, and I thought it was strange. I thought I'd mention it. I never once thought, Caleb, I didn't see anything. I saw 2 men move 3 barrels. That's all I saw. That's all I ever knew." "It's all he needs you to have seen," Caleb said grimly. "You're the only living soul who can put his men at that storehouse the night it burned. Don't matter that you didn't understand it. Bramwell can't take the chance you'll understand it later in front of the wrong man. That's why he didn't just run you out, Mrs. Whitaker. That's why he had to bury you. Burn your name, burn your work, make you a creature nobody'd believe if you walked into the marshal's office screaming the truth. He looked at the half-burned page. He didn't pick you because you were easy. He picked you because you were dangerous. And he hid it by making the whole town think you were nothing at all. Abby sat down hard on the workbench stool. For 11 months, she had believed herself unlucky. A widow in the wrong place, a convenient scapegoat, a small woman. A powerful man had stepped on the way. He'd step on a bug. To learn now that she had been the most dangerous person in Cedar Hollow, that the great machine of Silas Bramwell's cruelty had turned its whole weight on her. Not because she was nothing, but because she was a threat. It rearranged something in her chest. The shame she'd carried for 11 months cracked clean down the middle, and underneath it was rage, clean and bright and her own. "That coward," she whispered. "That smiling coward. He didn't fear me. He feared what I saw, and he made me feel like I'd done it. He made me feel ashamed." She stood up. "He's had me ashamed for 11 months of a thing I never did, and the whole time it's him, it's been him." Abby. It was the first time he'd used her name. She didn't notice it then. She'd notice it later, lying awake in the loft, the way he'd said it, soft, like a hand on the shoulder. "We've got the start of a thing here," Caleb said. "But it's only a start, and a dangerous one. Right now, we're two folks on a mountain with a scrap of canvas and a burned page, and Bramwell's got the sheriff, the bank, the water, and every frightened soul in that valley. We take this to Mercer, he hands it straight to Bramwell. We take it to nobody, it's worth nothing." He gathered the three things back into the saddlebag, careful. "We need more. We need the second man, the one rode with Harmon. We need somebody who'll stand up and say it out loud, who ain't a widow with a burned name. And we need to get all that before Bramwell figures out you've stopped being scared and started being a problem again. How long do we have?" Caleb was quiet. "Caleb, how long?" "Till the dry," he said. "Till the creeks drop and the cattle need that water crossing he owns. Once my herd's dying of thirst and the only water in 50 miles runs through his deeded land, he's got me by the throat and he knows it. He'll come up here with a smile and a price, and he'll offer to open the crossing if I'll hand you back." He looked at her steady. "And every day passed that the cattle die and a man starts to do math he's ashamed of." "You'd do that math?" "No." No hesitation. "But he believes I would because it's the math he'd do, and that makes it dangerous all the same. A man who thinks he knows your price is a man who'll keep pushing till he finds it. We've got till the creeks drop, Abby. 3 weeks, maybe 4 if the rains hold, and the rains never hold." The rains did not hold. The merchants turned first. Caleb rode down on a Tuesday for flour and salt and lamp oil, and Olin Pratt at the mercantile, who'd sold to him twice a season for 11 years, wouldn't meet his eye. "Can't do it, Rourke. Can't sell flour. Can't sell to you." Pratt's voice dropped. He glanced at the window. "Bramwell's word. Any man trades with the mountain he calls his note at the bank. I got a note, Rourke. Everybody in this town's got a note, and every note's got Bramwell's name behind it one way or another. I'm sorry. I am. But I got 4 children and a wife and a mortgage. Silas Bramwell can foreclose with a snap of his fingers." He pushed the coins back across the counter. "He says you're harboring a criminal. Says you're hiding the woman that burned his property. Folks believe it. It's easier to believe than the other thing." "What other thing?" Pratt looked at him. For a moment something honest came up in the man's frightened face. "That a rich man's lying," he said quietly, "and we're all of us too yellow to say so." He pushed the coins again. "Go home, Rourke, before he decides you're worth ruining all the way." Caleb rode home with empty saddlebags and told Abby plain because he'd decided early he'd never lie to her, not even kindly. "They've closed the town to us," he said. "Won't sell us a pound of flour. Bramwell's holding their notes over the fire." He hung up his hat. "We've got what's in the cellar and the smokehouse and what the land gives. We'll be hungry by August. Not starved. Hungry." Because of me. Because of him. You had a town that traded with you, and a herd with water, and a life that was quiet, Abby said. And now you've got a closed town, and a watch trail, and a hungry winter coming, and the only thing changed is me. Don't tell me it's him, Caleb. The cost is mine. He crossed the room. He didn't touch her. He never touched her. But he stood close, and he looked down at her with that steady, weathered face. And he said the thing she would turn over for the rest of her life. I have been alone on this mountain 11 years, he said. I had quiet. I had a herd and water and a town that sold me flour and a cabin. Nobody ever cried in, and nobody ever laughed in, and nobody ever lived in. Not really. I had everything you just named, and I'd have traded the whole of it, every acre, every steer, for one soul who'd kneel in the dirt to save the last of somebody she loved. His voice was rough. You didn't cost me my quiet life, Abby Whitaker. You ended it. There's a difference, and I thank God for it every morning I hear your boots on that loft ladder. So don't you tell me what this costs me. I'll be the judge of what I can afford. Abby's eyes filled, and she let them this once because there was no town watching. I don't know how to be wanted without owing for it, she whispered. I don't know how. Thomas was kind and I loved him, and even with him, I always felt I had to earn the air I breathed. And he's 11 months gone, and I haven't cried for him once where anybody could see, because crying is a thing you have to earn too, and I never— You don't have to earn a single thing in this house, Caleb said. Not the air, not the food, not the crying. He stepped back, giving her the room the way he always gave her room. Cry for your husband all you want, Abby. Up here there's nobody to perform it for and nobody to charge you. That's the one thing this mountain's good for. And Abigail Whitaker, who had not wept for Thomas Whitaker in 11 months, because grief in Cedar Hollow had been one more debt she couldn't pay, sat down at a mountain man's table and put her face in her hands and cried. Really cried ugly and loud and shaking for the husband she'd buried, and the name they'd burned, and the 11 months she'd spent shrinking, and Caleb Rourke went out and split firewood in the dark for an hour so she could do it alone. And that was its own kind of vow, the kind that doesn't need words. The storm came down 2 nights later, the dry summer kind, all wind and no rain, the kind that does nothing but break things and frighten the stock. Caleb was out in it before Abby was awake because a sound had come down off the ridge that he knew, and she didn't a horse screaming. She found him in the corral, with the bay down on its side thrashing a leg caught wrong in a length of fallen fence rail, the wind tearing at both of them. Hold his head, he shouted over the wind. His head. Abby, talk to him, he knows your voice better'n mine by now. She didn't think. She dropped beside the screaming animal and took its great head in her arms and put her mouth against its ear and talked nonsense soft, the way she'd have talked to a frightened child, the way she'd never gotten to talk to a child of her own. And the bay's wild eye rolled toward her and held, and it stopped thrashing just long enough for Caleb to get the rail clear and the leg free. They got him up. They got him to the lean-to. The leg wasn't broken, gashed ugly but whole, and they cleaned it and wrapped it together in the lantern light. 4 hands working close her thread and his strength until the worst of it was done, and the horse stood trembling but sound. They sat back against the wall, both of them filthy, both of them shaking with the spent fear of it, and Abby started to laugh. She couldn't help it. The wild, empty laugh of a person who's been frightened and isn't anymore, and after a moment, Caleb laughed too low, like a sound he was out of practice making. He knows my voice, Abby said, wiping her eyes. You said it like it was nothing. He knows my voice. I've been here 3 weeks and your horse knows my voice. Everything on this mountain knows your voice now, Caleb said. Horse, smokehouse cat. There's a hen comes when you call her and won't come for me. He looked at her sidelong. I've been here 11 years. That hen never come for me once. She laughed again, softer. And then she stopped laughing, because she had looked at him, really looked. His big hands still red from the horse's blood, and the lantern light on his tired face, and she felt the thing in her chest she'd buried next to Thomas get loose at last, and she could not get it back down. Caleb? That vow you made, in the road. Her heart was going hard. You said it stands the second I want it, and not 1 second before. He went very still. He didn't look at her. A man who'd learned the hard way not to want things looked straight ahead at the trembling horse. "I did say that," he said carefully. "I'm not saying it yet," Abby said quickly, and watched his shoulders ease just slightly with something that might have been relief and might have been the other thing. "I'm not. I've a husband, 11 months gone, and a name burned to ash, and a fight in front of me I can't have my whole heart in if it's somewhere else. I can't give you what I haven't got yet." She swallowed. "But I'm telling you so there's no lie between us because you've never told me one. I'm telling you that the day comes I get my name back and Bramwell answers for what he did, and I can stand in that valley as Abby Whittaker innocent out loud the day that comes." Her voice shook. "I might want it then. The vow. I might. And I needed you to know that so you'd understand what we're fighting for isn't just my name. It's whether there gets to be a winter where—" She couldn't finish it. For a long time, Caleb Rourke didn't move. Then he reached over slow, giving her every chance to pull away, and he took her hand the first time he'd touched her, the very first 3 weeks on his mountain, and the first time, and he held it in both of his bloodied ones, like a thing he'd been waiting 11 years to be allowed to hold. And he didn't say a word, because some vows are louder for the silence around them. The horse shifted in the straw. The wind died outside, and Abby left her hand in his. "Then we get your name back," Caleb said at last. Rough, quiet, sure. "We get it back out loud in front of the whole valley, with Silas Bramwell standing where everybody can watch him fall." And then he looked at her finally, and the steadiness in his eyes had something underneath it, now something that had been buried 11 years and gotten loose, same as hers. "And then we'll talk about winter." "Yes," Abby said. "Then." She held his hand in the lantern light, and for the first time since they'd thrown her husband's shirts in the dirt of Cedar Hollow. Abigail Whittaker was not afraid of what she wanted. She knew exactly what it was. It had a name and a shape and a roof that owed no man $1. And there was only one cattle broker and one burned page and one closing creek standing between her and the having of it. She tightened her fingers around his. "Then we'd best not lose," she said. The creeks dropped a finger's width a day, and Caleb measured them like a man counting his own heartbeats running out. He came up from the lower crossing on the 11th dry morning with his face set hard, and Abby met him at the corral, because she'd learned to read his walk. "He's done it," she said. It wasn't a question. "Damned it overnight. Rocks and brush across the only deep cut on his side of the deed line, where the law says he can." Caleb swung down. "My cattle are watering at a mud hole that'll be dust in a week. After that, it's 12 miles to the next reliable water, and they won't make 12 miles in this heat. He's not threatening to kill my herd anymore, Abby. He's started. Then we go now. We ride down with what we have, with a scrap of canvas and a burned page, and your word against his." Caleb shook his head. "We walk into that town today. We hand Mercer the evidence. Mercer hands it to Bramwell by supper time, and Bramwell burns it the way he burned the rest. We've got no witness'll stand. We've got nothing a lawyer can't laugh out of a room." He hung the rope. "We need one more thing, one soul that ain't us, and we're out of time to find it. How long does the herd have?" "Days. And how long do I have?" Abby's voice was quiet. "Before he stops watching the trail and starts coming up it." Caleb didn't answer, and the not answering was the answer, and they both stood in the heat of it, and knew. He came up the trail that same afternoon. Silas Bramwell rode up Caleb Rourke's mountain at the head of 6 armed men, polished and easy in the saddle, his good smile already arranged on his face for a quarter mile before he reached the yard. Del Harmon rode at his right hand with a rifle across his pommel and his eyes on the dirt. The others fanned out wide the way men fan out who've been told where to stand. Caleb stepped off the porch with his hat low and his hands empty and loose at his sides. He did not reach for the rifle by the door. He'd told Abby that sharp while they watched the dust climb. "Don't you touch that gun, and don't let him see you want to. A man like Bramwell wants you to draw. The second a gun comes out, he's the law, and we're the criminals. We win this with our hands where he can see 'em, or we don't win it at all." So they stood empty-handed, the two of them, while 6 rifles rode into the yard. "Rourke." Bramwell drew rein. His smile widened, warm as church. "Lord, you're a stubborn man. I'll give you that. Most men, you close their water, they come down the mountain hat in hand the same day. You—" He looked around the yard at the cabin, at the woman standing on the porch with her chin up. "You dig in. It's almost admirable. It's going to get your cattle killed, but it's almost admirable. You're on my land, Bramwell." "I am. I'll keep it brief." Bramwell folded his hands on the saddle horn. "I've come to make you a generous man's offer, because despite everything, I respect a fellow who works. Here it is. You give me the woman. She comes down off this mountain with me peaceable today, and the moment she's off your land, I open your crossing. Your herd drinks tonight. Your year is saved. Your 11 years of work goes on." The smile never moved. "One widow Rourke against everything you've ever built. That's the math. I'd think hard before I called it a hard sum." "No," Caleb said. Bramwell tilted his head. "I'll sweeten it. $200 on top of the water. Call it a kindness for your trouble. $200 and you're crossing back for one woman who'll be gone from your life inside the hour and forgotten inside a season." "No." "300. Bramwell." Caleb's voice didn't rise. "You could pile gold up to the porch rail and the answer'd be the same word said the same quiet till you got tired of hearing it. She don't go anywhere she don't choose. That's the whole of it. You've had my answer 4 times now. There ain't a 5th coming." For just a moment, just one, the smile faltered. And in that moment, Abby saw the thing under it. The thing she'd seen in the road in Cedar Hollow. The cold patient. Nothing that smiled while it buried people. "You're going to lose your herd," Bramwell said softly, "over a woman who burned my property." "She never burned a thing of yours," Caleb said, "and you and I both know it because you struck the match. Or you paid a man to. Same difference where I come from." The yard went still. Del Harmon's head came up off the dirt at last, and his eyes flicked not to Caleb, to Bramwell, and that flick told Abby everything that the man was strung tight as a fence wire, and had been for some time. Bramwell laughed. It was a good laugh. "Now there's a serious accusation from a man with no proof and no water and a dying herd. Be careful, Rourke. A man says a thing like that out loud in front of witnesses." He gestured at his own men at the rifles. "And finds he can't back it well. That's slander. That's a thing the law takes a hard view of. And the law and I are old friends." "I know you are," Caleb said, and Abby stepped to the porch rail. "Mr. Bramwell." Every head turned. Caleb's jaw tightened. They hadn't planned for her to speak, but he didn't stop her, because he'd promised her a mountain, where she didn't have to be small, and a man keeps his promises, even when they frighten him. "You keep saying I burned your storehouse," Abby said. Her voice carried clear across the yard, steady, as it had not been in the road in Cedar Hollow, steady the way a thing gets when it stopped being afraid. "Out of bitterness, you said. Spite. A dismissed woman's revenge. You've told it so many times the whole valley believes it." She came down one step. "But you've never once said what was in that storehouse, Mr. Bramwell. $300 of seed oil you told the town. Funny. Because what I'd like to know, what I'd like you to say out loud right here in front of your 6 men, is why a storehouse full of seed oil had a freight ledger in it, and why that ledger had Eustace's cattle and your cattle written down as the very same head twice over." Bramwell's smile did not move, but his hands did. They tightened on the saddle horn just slightly, just enough. "And why?" Abby went on. And now her voice shook, but with rage, not fear. "You needed it to burn so bad, you sent 2 men to roll oil barrels behind it in the dark the night before. I watched them do it, Mr. Bramwell. I watched one of them do it." She lifted her arm and pointed, and her hand did not waver. "That one. Del Harmon. Sitting on your right hand with a rifle on my mountain. Go on, Del, look at me. You know I saw you." Del Harmon would not look at her. He stared at his pommel like it was the only thing holding him to the earth. "This is theater," Bramwell said, but the warmth had finally gone out of his voice, and the 6 men felt it and shifted. This is a hysterical woman and a stubborn fool spinning a story to save a dying herd. Mrs. Whitaker, you saw nothing. You're a known liar. The town has already judged you. He gathered his reins. And it's about to judge you again, because I didn't ride up here only to offer you charity Rourke. I came to deliver a paper. He drew it from his coat, a folded document sealed official. A warrant, Bramwell said, and the smile came back all the way back worse than before. Sworn before Judge Aldous Pratt of the Territorial Court, who I'm pleased to call a personal friend, for the arrest of one Abigail Whitaker, widow, on the charge of arson and the willful destruction of property. He let it hang. You've got till sundown tomorrow to bring her down off this mountain and into the custody of Sheriff Mercer. After that I send men to fetch her, and a woman taken off a mountain by armed men resisting a lawful warrant. Well, things happen to such women on the trail down Rourke. Accidents. It's rough country. His eyes were flat and cold and certain. Arson's a hanging crime in this territory if it's done with intent to harm, and I'll see it's argued she meant to harm. By winter, Mrs. Whitaker, he tipped his hat to her mocking deliberate, and Abby's blood ran cold because he knew somehow he'd heard the vow had reached him. By winter, you'll be in the ground, not in this man's house. Sundown tomorrow. He wheeled his horse. The 6 men wheeled with him, and Silas Bramwell rode back down Caleb Rourke's mountain with his good smile fixed and his warrant delivered, and he did not look back because he had never once in his life needed to. Abby's legs went out from under her. Caleb caught her before she hit the porch boards. "He has a judge," she whispered. "He has a judge, Caleb. He has a paper. He has the law itself. It's not the town anymore. It's the territory. It's a noose." "I know. They'll hang me. He'll see they hang me. He'll get up in that court with his good suit and his good smile, and that judge that's his friend. And they'll put a rope on me for a fire I watched him set. Abby." Caleb held her by the shoulders. "Look at me. He's frightened. He's frightened. He has a warrant. He came up here with 6 guns and a judge's paper to deal with one widow," Caleb said. 6 guns, Abby, for you. A man that's sure of himself, a man that owns the law, he sends one deputy with a piece of paper and a yawn. He doesn't ride up a mountain at the head of an army. He's frightened. You scared him in that road in Cedar Hollow when you named his men out loud, and you scared him worse just now, naming his ledger in front of his own riders, and a frightened man with all the power in the world is a more dangerous thing than a calm one, but he's still frightened, and frightened men make mistakes. He gripped her tighter. "We've got till sundown tomorrow. That's not a death sentence. That's a clock, and a clock can be beat." But she saw it in his face too. Under the steadiness she'd learned to read him, she saw that he didn't know how. She made her decision in the dark, the way the hardest decisions are always made. She lay in the loft and listened to Caleb not sleeping by the stove, the small sounds of a big man lying awake, and she did the math Bramwell had laid out, and she did it honest. One widow against everything Caleb had built. One burned name against a herd, a mountain, 11 years of a man's whole life. And a warrant that meant if she stayed, Caleb would die fighting men on the trail to keep her, and she would hang anyway, and it would all be for nothing. If she left, rode south in the dark alone, vanished into the territory, where no warrant could find a nameless woman, then the warrant had no one to serve. Bramwell would open the water. Caleb's herd would live. Caleb would live. He'd hate her for it. He'd grieve. But he'd be alive on his mountain, and that was a thing she could give him, the one thing, the last thing. And a woman who'd spent 11 months learning she could only ever be wanted if she earned it, knew exactly how to earn this. She climbed down the ladder at 3 a.m. with her boots in her hand. She had the bay's bridle off the peg when his voice came from the dark by the stove. "Don't." She froze. "I've been laying here 3 hours. Caleb said, "waiting to hear that ladder. Knew you'd come down it. Knew exactly what you'd do, because it's the same thing I'd do, the noble, stupid thing, the thing that feels like love and is really just running dressed up in its Sunday clothes." He sat up. "Put the bridle back, Abby." "Caleb, You think I don't know the math? He stood. One widow against my whole life. I've done that sum 100 times. You want to know the answer I keep getting. The answer's the same one I gave Bramwell in your road. The answer's no. He crossed to her in the dark. If you ride south tonight, you don't save me. You ruin me worse than Bramwell ever could, because then I'm a man on a mountain who let a woman ride off to disappear alone in the dark to save his cows. You think I could water a single steer at that crossing knowing what it cost? You think I could draw one breath up here alone again, the cabin gone quiet again, knowing I'm only breathing it because you rode off to nowhere, so I wouldn't have to fight for you? His voice broke the first time she'd ever heard it break. Don't you dare call that saving me, Abby. That's killing me slow and calling it a kindness. I've had enough of that for one life. They'll hang me if I stay. Then we don't let them. You don't have a how, Caleb. I've seen your face. You don't have a how. There's a judge and a warrant and a clock, and you don't have a how. Then let me be ruined standing for something true. It came out of him loud, the loudest she'd ever heard him, a man who never wasted a word, spending all of them at once. It rang off the cabin walls and hung there. 11 years, he said, quieter, shaking. 11 years I had a quiet life and a clean mind and not one single thing in it worth ruining myself over. You know what that is, Abby. That's not peace. That's just a man already half in the ground, keeping still so the dirt don't notice him. Then you knelt down in that road for a dead man's shirts and you woke me clean up. And if standing for you is the thing that ruins me, if I lose the herd and the water and the mountain and the 11 years, then by God, let me lose it, standing up for the one true thing I ever found, instead of dying slow on a mountain protecting cows nobody'll remember. He took the bridle out of her hand. I'd rather be ruined for you than safe without you. That ain't sacrifice, Abby. That's the first selfish thing I've wanted in 11 years. Let me have it. Abby stood in the dark with empty hands and a heart gone wild. Then we need a how, she whispered. Because I won't watch you ruined for nothing. I'll stand and fight Caleb. I will. I'll stop running. But we need a how, and we have until sundown, and we have nothing. A horse came up the trail. They both went still. One horse walking slow in the black hour before dawn, the most dangerous hour, the hour men come when they mean the worst. Caleb put Abby behind him and took the rifle off the pegs and stood in the door. And they waited, and the horse came into the yard, and a voice came out of the dark, low and wrecked and shaking. Rourke, don't shoot. It's Del Harmon. I ain't armed. I left the rifle. God help me, I just want to talk. Caleb didn't lower the gun. You're a long way up my mountain in the dark, Del. He sent me to do it, Harmon said, and his voice cracked clean apart. Tonight. Before the warrant even. He told me he said the warrant's just for show, just to make it legal looking after. He said come up tonight quiet and then make the woman disappear. Make it look like she run off south. He said no one had ever asked after a fugitive arsonist. He said... Harmon made a sound that wasn't a word. I've done bad things for that man Rourke. I rolled them barrels. I helped him burn his own storehouse to kill them books. I stood by while he set a noose for a woman I knew was innocent, because I knew it'd be me in her place if I didn't. But this... He sent me up here to kill a widow in her sleep, and I sat at the bottom of your trail for 2 hours, and I couldn't... His voice gave out entirely. I couldn't do it. I ain't that. Whatever I am, I ain't that. So I come up to tell you, to warn you, and to say... He swung down off his horse in the dark, and they heard him hit his knees in the dirt of the yard. To say I'll tell it. Del. Harmon wept. All of it. The barrels, the ledger, the storehouse. That he ordered it, that I rolled the oil, that the second man was Bramwell's own foreman, Coy Lassard, who's been altering brands for him 2 years. That there's a strong box under the floor of the freight office with the rest of the books that never burned because Bramwell kept 'em close, that he's been insuring cattle that don't exist and collecting on dead ones twice. I'll tell a judge, a real one, not Aldous Pratt. I'll tell a marshal. I'll put my own neck in the noose beside the truth If that's what it takes, because I have not slept a whole night in 11 months either, ma'am." He was talking to Abby. Now his face turned up toward the porch, streaming. "Not one whole night since I watched that town throw your things in the road for a thing I helped do. I'll tell it. Just God let me tell it." Abby came past Caleb, passed the rifle down the porch steps, and she stood over the kneeling man who had helped ruin her, and Caleb watched her and did not breathe. "Get up, Mr. Harmon," she said. "Ma'am, I didn't ask what you deserve." Her voice was iron. "I asked you to get up because a witness does his telling on his feet, not his knees. And I have got a man up there." She pointed at Caleb at the porch, at the rifle still in his hands. "Who is about to lose everything he owns, standing up for me. And I will not waste your testimony letting you wallow in the dirt, feeling sorry. There's no time for sorry. There's a clock. So get up. Get up and tell me where Martha Reed is, because if there's a strong box in that freight office, we're going to need an honest soul who'll swear she saw your wagons the night of the fire, and the whole town knows that old widows never told a lie in her life." Del Harmon stared up at her. "You," he said. "You ain't even going to I helped burn your name, lady. I helped put a noose around your neck. And you're asking me about strong boxes. Hate keeps no clock, and waters no cattle, and clears no name," Abby said. "I've a whole valley to face by sundown tomorrow, and a man's life to save, and my own name to dig up out of the ash. I don't have time to hate you, Mr. Harmon. I've only got time to use you." She put out her hand to him in the dark. "Now get up, and let's go ruin Silas Bramwell before he ruins all three of us." They rode down at first light, the four of them. For Martha Reed had been waiting at the foot of the trail at dawn, sent for in the night by a boy. Del Harmon paid his last coins, an old widow on an old mule, with an older Bible in her lap, and a look on her face, like a woman who'd been waiting 11 months to be asked. "Took you long enough." "Child," was all Martha Reed said to Abby, and reached over and gripped her hand hard. And that was the whole of it. 11 months of one woman's quiet witness in a single squeeze of an old hand. They rode into Cedar Hollow at mid-morning, and the town saw them come. It saw the mountain cowboy and the widow they'd thrown in the dirt, and it saw Del Harmon riding with them instead of for Bramwell, and it saw old Martha Reed, who never lied, and the street began to fill, the way it had filled the day they cast Abby out, the same faces, the Pruitt sisters, Hattie Combs, Olin Pratt, in his apron drawn by the same old hunger to watch. And Silas Bramwell came out onto the boardwalk of the freight office with his good smile already fixed, because he had heard the horses, and he had never once in his life needed to be afraid of a crowd. "Well," he called, easy warm, spreading his hands. "The fugitives saved me a trip. Sheriff Mercer, there's your warrant standing in the street. Take her." Mercer came out hitching his belt, not meeting anyone's eyes the way he never met anyone's eyes. And Abby Whitaker swung down off the bay in the middle of Cedar Hollow's main street in the same dust where they'd thrown her husband's shirts, and she did not wait for the sheriff, and she did not wait for Caleb, and she did not wait for permission. She walked straight at Silas Bramwell. 11 months ago," she said loud, so the whole street had it. "You stood on that boardwalk and threw my dead husband's clothes in this road, and you told these people I was a liar, and not one of them asked you for proof." She stopped at the foot of the steps and looked up at him. "You want proof now? Mr. Bramwell, you want it in front of the whole town this time? Because I brought it. I brought all of it." Bramwell laughed. "You brought a turncoat hand who'll say anything to save his own neck, a senile old widow, and a cowboy who wants in your skirts. That's not proof, Mrs. Whitaker. That's a sad little circus." "Sheriff." "There's a strong box under the floor of your freight office," Abby said. The street went quiet. Back left corner, under the third board from the wall. Her voice never shook. "It holds the freight ledgers that didn't burn the real ones with Eustace's cattle and the Crowfoot herd and the Lazy K, all written twice, once under their brands and once under yours, so you could insure beasts that never drew breath and collect on dead ones double. Del Harmon rolled the oil that burned the copies in your storehouse. Coy Lessard, your own foreman, altered the brands. And Martha Reed watched your wagons haul off the real cattle the same night your storehouse burned the proof. You didn't run me out of this town because I was nothing, Mr. Bramwell." She climbed the first step toward him, and Caleb came off his horse and crossed the street and stood at the bottom of the steps behind her, saying nothing. His hat low, his presence a wall, and his silence was louder than any gun. "You ran me out because I was the only soul in this valley who saw your men in the dark, and you've spent 11 months making this whole town believe I was a liar so that nobody would ever believe me when I finally said it out loud." She climbed the second step. "Well, I'm saying it out loud, Silas. In your street. To your face. In front of every soul who threw me in the dirt. You burned that storehouse. You set a noose for an innocent woman to cover a thief's crime. And the only fire I ever started." She stood level with him now. "This small, fierce widow, and she did not blink, is the one that's about to burn you down." And for the first time in his life, in front of the whole gathered town of Cedar Hollow, Silas Bramwell's good smile slid off his face, and there was nothing underneath it but a frightened man, and the town saw it. The town saw it. And in the dead and ringing silence, old Martha Reed climbed down off her mule, opened her Bible, to where a folded paper waited, pressed between the pages, held it up in her shaking, honest hand, and said in a voice that carried to the back of the crowd, "I wrote down what I saw that night. The date, the wagons, the freight mark. I wrote it that very evening 11 months ago, and I had Reverend Coyle witness my hand and seal it because I knew God. Forgive me for staying quiet so long. I knew this day would come." She looked at the trembling man on the boardwalk. "I'm an old woman, Silas Bramwell. I've got nothing left you can take, and no note you can call, and no fear of you at all. So I'll say it plain the way this child here taught me courage by standing up first." She raised the paper higher. "She never lit your fire. You did, and I can prove it." Mercer took the paper from Martha Reed's hand, because he could not think of a reason in front of the whole town not to, and he read it, and the street watched his face. And his face was the face of a man finally being asked to do the one thing he'd spent 11 months not doing. "Sheriff," Bramwell said, and his voice had climbed a half step. "Sheriff, you know that old woman's mind is gone. You know it. She's confused a wagon she saw months ago. It's dated, Silas." Mercer didn't look up from the paper. "Witnessed by Reverend Coyle. Sealed. The night before your fire. Wagons hauling cattle off your freight mark after dark." He lowered it. "That ain't a confused old woman. That's a record. It's a forgery. Then we'll dig up your floor and prove it one way or the other." Mercer turned to the freight office. "Olin, get me a crowbar. Don't you touch my floor." Bramwell's hand moved not to a gun, not yet, but to the doorframe, his body half turning to block the door, and the town saw a man guarding a thing. "That's my property. That's private property, and you've no warrant." "You're real fond of warrants today, Silas," Mercer said. "Real fond. Funny how a man's love of the law runs hot and cold." A laugh went through the crowd. A small one. But it went through, and Bramwell heard it, and Abby watched him hear it. The first time in 11 years Cedar Hollow had laughed at Silas Bramwell instead of trembling for him, and she watched the knowledge of it cross his face like a shadow over water. Olin Pratt came out with the crowbar. He stood holding it, looking from Mercer to Bramwell, and everyone understood the moment for what it was. Olin Pratt held a note at Bramwell's bank. So did half the men in that street. To hand Mercer that crowbar was to choose out loud in front of everyone whether Silas Bramwell still ran this town. "Olin," Bramwell said softly, "think very carefully about your mortgage." Olin Pratt looked at the crowbar in his hands. Then he looked at Abby Whitaker, standing on the steps where they'd thrown her dead husband's shirts, and something in the man's frightened face broke loose. "My boy wears a coat she sewed," Olin said. "3 winters now. Good work. Honest work." He turned and put the crowbar in Mercer's hand. "Tear up the floor, Sheriff. I'm tired of being afraid of him. We're all of us tired of being afraid of him. Tear it up." They tore it up. It took 4 men and a quarter hour, Bramwell white and rigid in the doorway, with 2 of his own riders edging away from him, now sensing the turn the way animals sense a storm. And under the third board from the wall, in the back left corner, exactly where Abby had said they found the strongbox. Mercer carried it out into the street and set it in the dirt. It was locked. He looked at Bramwell. "Key Silas." "I won't." "Dell." Mercer didn't take his eyes off Bramwell. "You worked for him. Where's he keep his keys?" Dell Harmon came forward slow. "Watch chain. Left vest pocket. The small brass one." And Bramwell's hand went to his vest and kept going past the watch chain down toward the coat, toward the thing under the coat. And Abby saw it start, and her breath stopped, and Caleb was already moving. He didn't shout. He didn't draw. He crossed the distance in 3 long strides and closed one enormous hand around Bramwell's wrist, before the gun cleared the coat and he held it there. The cattle broker's whole arm trapped, and he leaned down close and said, quiet only for the 2 of them, and the front row, "You don't want to do that, Silas." Almost gentle. "You pull that gun in front of this town, and every soul here gets to watch the great Silas Bramwell hang a woman with his own hand instead of a judge's. That's the one thing left could make 'em hate you worse than they're starting to. So let it go." He squeezed slow, and the derringer dropped out of Bramwell's fingers into the dust. "There it is. There's a wise man." He stepped back. He hadn't raised his voice once. The whole street had seen it, and the whole street understood what they'd seen, that the mountain man had taken a gun off Silas Bramwell with one hand, and never once looked angry doing it. And that was a kind of power the town had no name for, because it was the opposite of every power they'd ever feared. Mercer took the brass key off Bramwell's watch chain himself. He opened the strongbox in the middle of the street, and the town crowded close. And Abby crowded closest, and what was inside was worse than any of them had guessed. The ledgers were there, 3 of them. The real tallies, every brand written twice, every phantom steer insured, and every dead one collected on double 2 years of patient thieving, laid out in Bramwell's own neat hand. Abby's heart hammered when she saw it confirmed in ink, the whole shape of the thing she'd only ever glimpsed, as 2 men rolling barrels in the dark. But under the ledgers were the letters. Mercer read the first one and went still. He read it again. And then slow, he looked up, not at Bramwell. Past him, down the street toward the courthouse, toward the office of Judge Aldous Pratt. "Silas," Mercer said, and his voice had gone strange. "These letters are to the judge." The street went dead quiet. "To Aldous Pratt," Mercer said, louder reading, thanking him for his discretion regarding the Eustace matter. Enclosing a further consideration of $400, confirming that the insurance complaints filed by the territorial assessor would be. He turned the page, managed at the bench. He lowered the letter. His face had gone gray. "He bought the judge, folks. The judge that signed the warrant on this woman this very morning. He's been buying him for 2 years. The fraud, the fire, the warrant, all of it runs straight through the courthouse." A roar went up from the crowd, and it was not the old roar, the satisfied, cruel murmur Abby had learned to dread. It was a different sound entirely. It was the sound of a town discovering it had been robbed not just of money, but of its own justice, that the law it had been so afraid to cross had been bought out from under it the whole time. And in the noise of it, Coy Lessard ran. The foreman bolted from the edge of the crowd for the alley, and it was Dell Harmon who caught him. Dell, who knew exactly which way a guilty man runs, because he'd been one, and dragged him back into the street by the collar and threw him down in the dirt at Mercer's feet. "Tell him, Coy," Dell said, breathing hard. "Tell him before you swing alone for it. I told mine. You tell yours." And Coy Lessard, on his knees in the dust, looked up at the strongbox, and the letters, and the gray-faced sheriff, and the town that wasn't afraid anymore, and he made the calculation every cornered man makes. "I altered the brands," he said. 2 years. He paid me. The fire was to burn the storehouse copies. Dell rolled the oil. I struck the match. Bramwell stood at the creek and watched to be sure it caught. He was babbling now, fast, desperate the way men talk when they've decided their only friend left in the world is the truth. And the woman, the Whitaker woman Bramwell, came to us the next morning, white as a sheet. Said somebody'd been on the road. Said a widow'd seen the wagons. Said she had to be buried before she put it together, made into a liar, Nobody'd believe run out. And if running her out didn't take, then... Lessard stopped. Then what? Mercer said. Lessard looked at Abby. Then worse, he whispered. He sent Dell up that mountain last night to make her disappear for good. That's God's truth. He meant to kill her in her sleep and call it a runaway. The warrant was just to make the body legal after. The street went so quiet you could hear the wind. Abby stood on the steps and listened to the plain, flat confirmation of the things she'd suspected, and could never prove that a man had decided calmly over his morning coffee that her life was a loose thread to be cut, and she did not feel vindicated. She felt cold. She felt the 11 months of shame she'd carried turn fully finally into something else, into the simple, terrible knowledge of how close she'd come and how little it had weighed on the man who'd ordered it. Sheriff Mercer. Her voice was very quiet, but it carried. You've got a man's own foreman confessing to arson, and a hired man confessing he was sent to murder me, and a strongbox full of letters proving the judge who signed my warrant was bought. She came down the steps. What are you going to do about it, in front of all these people, right now? Mercer looked at her. The tired lawman looked at the woman he'd told to take the 4 o'clock coach, the woman he'd failed 11 months ago because failing was easier, and something straightened in him, some spine that fear had bent. Dale Mercer. He said his own name slow, like a man swearing in. I've been sheriff of this county 9 years, and for 2 of them I've been a coward, and this town knows it, and so do I. He turned to Bramwell. Silas Bramwell, I'm arresting you for arson, for insurance fraud, for bribery of a territorial judge, and for soliciting the murder of Abigail Whitaker. He pulled the irons off his belt. And God is my witness, I'm sending to Helena for a territorial marshal myself today, because the courthouse in this town can't be trusted to try a dogfight, let alone this. You won't stand before your bought Judge Silas. You'll stand before one you never met and can't reach. He stepped forward. Hands. Bramwell did not give him his hands. He looked around the street at his fled riders, at his kneeling foreman, at the town that had laughed at him, at the strongbox, at the irons, and the good smile came back one last time, ghastly, now a dead man's grin. You think this is justice? His voice shook with something that wasn't fear. Contempt. The pure, cold contempt of a man who has bought every soul he ever met and cannot believe the market has finally closed. You sanctimonious, mortgaged, frightened little people. Every one of you took my money. Every one of you crossed the street when I told you to. You, he pointed at Olin Pratt, begged me for that note. You, at Hattie Combs, sold me the very lamp oil. You were glad to throw her in the dirt when it cost you nothing, and now you're glad to hang me because it costs you nothing, and you'll call it conscience either way. He turned his terrible grin on Abby. You haven't won anything, woman. You've only changed who they're afraid of. Tomorrow, they'll fear the marshal or the bank or each other. That's all people are? That's all this town ever was. And Abby Whitaker looked at the man who had nearly destroyed her, and she understood at last the deepest thing about him, that his cruelty had never been hot, never been personal, that he had buried her with the same calm he'd used to brand a steer. Because to Silas Bramwell, people were only ever ledger entries, assets and liabilities. And she had been a liability, nothing more. No, Silas, she said quietly. You're wrong, and you're wrong in the one way that's going to follow you down to your grave. She gestured at Martha Reed, at Del Harmon, at Olin Pratt, holding the crowbar at the whole turned street. You think they only changed who they fear. But look at them. Look hard, since it's the last free look you'll get. They're not afraid right now. That's the thing you never once in your life understood, because you only ever knew how to buy fear and sell it. A frightened town threw me in the dirt. It took an unafraid one to dig me out. She stepped close to him, close enough that only he could hear the last of it. You spent 11 years making this whole valley small, so you could feel large. And it turns out all it took to end you was one widow who got too tired to stay small. That's not the law, winning Silas. That's not even me winning. That's just what happens to men like you eventually in the end. You bet your whole life that nobody would ever stand up, and somebody finally did. Oh, Beaky, She stepped back. "Hands, Mr. Bramwell," she said. "You heard the sheriff." And Silas Bramwell, with the whole unafraid town watching, put out his hands. The irons closed. The street did not cheer. It did something better and stranger and quieter. It exhaled altogether. 11 years of held breath, let go at once, and several of the women were weeping, and old men who'd bowed to Bramwell for a decade stood up a little straighter, and Mercer led the cattle broker away through a crowd that parted not in fear now, but in something like awe. The water came back that same afternoon. Mercer sent 2 men with Del Harmon to tear out the dam at the crossing, and by evening, Caleb's cattle were standing belly deep in the deep cut, drinking their fill, and a thing that had been a noose around the mountain for 2 weeks was simply gone, undone. In an hour, the way the worst threats so often turn out to be, only rocks and brush. A few honest men can move once they decide to. But the harder thing came when the town tried to make it right. They came to her in 2s and 3s that evening, and the next morning, the people of Cedar Hollow, hats in hands. Hattie Combs came first, red-eyed, twisting her apron. "Abby, Mrs. Whitaker, I'm so sorry. I am. I never believed it. Not really in my heart, I never—" "You crossed the street, Hattie." Abby's voice was not cruel. It was only true. 11 months ago, with my husband 11 days in the ground. You crossed the street so you wouldn't have to look at me. She looked at the weeping woman steadily. "I'm not going to tell you it's all right. It wasn't all right. I'm not going to hand you back the easy feeling you came here for, but I'll shake your hand because I'm not Silas Bramwell, and I won't bury you the way he buried me. That's the most I've got today. Maybe there'll be more someday, but not today, and not bought with one apology." Hattie took the offered hand and wept harder, and Abby let her. And it was its own hard mercy, not forgiveness, not yet, but the refusal to become the thing that had hurt her. Mrs. Pruitt came. Olin Pratt came, and that one Abby held a moment longer because he'd handed Mercer the crowbar when it cost him everything. Reverend Coyle came to say Martha's affidavit had been the bravest thing he'd witnessed in 40 years of ministry. The whole machinery of a town's guilt cranked into motion, apology by apology, and Abby stood and received it and gave back exactly as much as was honest, and not 1 ounce more, and Caleb watched her do it from the edge of the street, his hat low, saying nothing prouder than he had words for. That night back on the mountain, she sat on the porch steps, and Caleb came and sat near her, not touching the way he never touched, unless she reached first, and for a long while, neither of them spoke, because there was too much. "I keep waiting to feel it," Abby said at last. "The thing I thought I'd feel. I've got my name back, Caleb. Tomorrow the marshal comes from Helena, and it's over all of it in the law and out loud the way I swore I wanted." She looked at her hands. "And I just feel tired. And cold. Being proven innocent doesn't give me back the 11 months, does it? It doesn't give me back the morning Hattie crossed the street. It doesn't undo a single hour of being made to feel ashamed of a thing I never did." Her voice wavered. "I thought clearing my name would heal it. And it didn't. It just stopped the bleeding. The scar's still there." Caleb was quiet a long moment. "My mother never got her name back," he said finally. "I told you a town did to her what they done to you. They never gave it back. She died with it still wrong, and I was a boy, and I couldn't fix it, and I carried that up a mountain and sat with it 11 years. He looked out at the dark. "I used to think if I could just see it set right, once one woman, one town, one time, it'd heal the thing in me. Then I watched you do it today. I watched you get every bit of it back out loud, in the very street." He turned to her. "And you're right. It don't heal. I'm sitting here next to the thing I waited 11 years to see, and the scar in me's still there too. Being right don't undo being hurt. Nothing does. That's just the truth nobody tells you." "Then what's it for?" Abby whispered. "If it doesn't heal it, what's any of it for?" "It's not for healing the old wound," Caleb said. "It's for making sure there's a different kind of life after it. The scar stays, but what you build over it, that's yours to choose. That part nobody can take." He shifted to face her fully. Abby. I made you a vow in a road the first hour I knew you, and I told you it'd stand the second you wanted it, and not 1 second before. You told me on the night of the storm that maybe when your name was clear, and you could stand in that valley as yourself, you might want it then. He swallowed. Your name's clear, so I'm asking. Not to rescue you. You've proved to the whole territory you don't need rescuing. You went and rescued your own self and me besides. I'm not offering you a roof to hide under. He took off his hat. He held it against his chest the way he had in the road. I don't need a helpless woman in my house. Abby Whitaker, he said, his voice rough and low and sure. I've got no use for one. What I need, what I've needed 11 years and never had the courage to say till you walked up my trail with a dead man's shirts in your arms, is a brave one beside me. A partner. Somebody who'll stand in a street and stare down the devil himself with her chin up. I had that quiet life, and I'd burn the whole of it again twice over for one more day of you in it. He looked at her, and his eyes were wet, and he did not hide it. Stay. Not because there's nowhere else. There's everywhere else. Now your name's clean, the world's open, you could go any place and be anybody. Stay because you choose it. Marry me because you want to, the same way you did everything else today on your own 2 feet, eyes open, afraid of nothing. A pause. Will you? Abby Whitaker looked at the big quiet man holding his hat against his chest on the porch of a cabin that owed no man a dollar, and she thought of Thomas, who she had loved and buried, and she found to her own quiet wonder that loving this one did not betray that one, that her heart had not been a debt to be paid, but a thing that could grow new rooms. She did not answer right away. She had learned the value of a pause. Then, slow in the dark, the way he had taken her hand in the lantern light the night of the storm, she reached out and took his. Not because she had nowhere else to put it, but because there was nowhere else she'd rather. And she held it and let him feel that it was steady, and that it was a choice, and that it was hers. The preacher came through on the 3rd Sunday, and Caleb Rourke married Abigail Whitaker in the little church at Cedar Hollow, with the whole town packed into the pews, the same town that had thrown her in the dirt, sitting now with their hats in their hands, and more than a few of them weeping. Martha Reed stood up as her witness. Del Harmon stood at the back by the door, hat in his hands, because he wasn't sure he had the right to sit, and Abby had walked the length of that church before the service to take him by the arm and seat him in the 2nd row in front of the whole staring town. And the message of it was not lost on a single soul. The woman they'd buried had risen, and she chose her own company now, and she chose mercy. You don't have to do that, Del had whispered, stricken. Not for me, not after. I'm not doing it for you, Mr. Harmon, Abby had said. I'm doing it so this town watches a man get a second chance instead of a noose. They need to learn the difference. So do you. Sit down. She wore a dress she'd sewn herself plain and fine, and when Reverend Coyle asked who gave this woman, no one rose, because there was no one left to give her. Her father dead. Her people scattered her first husband in the ground, and the silence stretched, and it might have been a sad thing, a lonely thing. And then old Martha Reed stood up in the front pew, 80 years old, and straight as a fence rail, and said in her carrying voice, She gives herself. She's earned the right. Get on with it, Reverend. The church laughed and wept at once, and Caleb Rourke took Abby's hand, and they were wed. The marshal came from Helena that same month, a hard, quiet man named Eli Sturgis, who answered to no one in the territory, and he took one look at the strongbox letters and sent for Judge Aldous Pratt before the judge could burn a single page of his own. Pratt tried to talk his way out. He was a judge. He knew the music of the law better than any man in the room, and he played it. The letters were forgeries. The witnesses were a turncoat and a senile widow and a vengeful woman. The whole thing a conspiracy against a respected jurist. It almost worked. It was the kind of thing that had always worked. Then Sturgis laid down one more letter. One Abby herself had found sorting the strongbox papers a second time, when no one thought to look again. A letter in Pratt's own hand, setting a price for the warrant against her, dated the very morning Bramwell rode up the mountain. The judge's own writing naming the sum, naming her. The room went quiet. "That your hand, Judge?" Sturgis asked. And Aldous Pratt, who had spent 30 years deciding which men hanged and which men walked, looked at his own writing and had nothing left to say, and that was the end of him. Bramwell never came to trial in Cedar Hollow at all. Sturgis took him to Helena in irons to a court he'd never bought and couldn't reach. And the news came back in autumn that the great cattle broker who'd ruled a valley for 11 years had been sentenced to 15 years hard labor for fraud, arson, bribery, and the solicitation of murder, and that he'd wept in the courtroom Silas Bramwell, who'd never needed to look back weeping in front of strangers who didn't know his name and didn't care. Abby felt nothing when she heard it. She'd expected to feel triumph. Instead, she felt the way a person feels when a long fever finally breaks, emptied, quiet, and ready at last to begin living the life the fever had stolen. She built that life with both hands, the way she'd built everything. By autumn, the cabin that had stood 11 years without a single thing to soften it was a home. The smokehouse was full and ordered every cut where she could find it. The root cellar was stocked 4 deep against the winter. There was a garden where there'd been only dust and curtains she'd sewn from feed sacks dyed blue, and a chair by the stove with her sewing basket beside it, and the whole place had the warm, worn look of a house that was lived in. Really lived in the way Caleb had said his never was, and she did not stop being herself to do it. She took in sewing. It started small. Martha Reed needed a dress let out, and then Martha bragged on the work, and then a rancher's wife from the lower valley rode up the mountain with a bolt of cloth and a request, and then another. By the first snow, Abigail Rourke had more orders than she could fill ranch wives for 30 miles, sending up their finest cloth to the seamstress on the mountain, and she kept a tin behind the flour where her own money grew. Money she'd earned with her own steel needle, and she was nobody's charity, and nobody's burden, and nobody's debt. "You don't have to keep at it so hard," Caleb told her one evening, watching her squint at fine work by lamplight. "We've got plenty. The herd came through fat. You don't owe a soul a stitch." "I know I don't owe it." Abby didn't look up from the seam. "That's exactly why I do it, Caleb. For 11 months in that town, I sewed to survive, and it didn't save me, and I learned that a woman who can only be wanted for what she gives is a woman who can be thrown away the day she can't give it." Her needle flashed. "I sew now because I'm good at it, and because the money in that tin is mine, and because if the whole world burned down tomorrow, I'd still know I could make my own way in it. That's not a thing you keep when you're scared, Caleb. That's a thing you keep so you never have to be scared again. There's a difference." Caleb looked at his wife a long moment in the lamplight. "There surely is," he said quietly, and he never raised the subject again, because he'd married a woman who'd taught a whole town the meaning of standing on her own feet, and a man doesn't ask a woman like that to sit down. The vow came due in the deep of winter. She'd suspected for some weeks and said nothing, the way she held things close until she was sure. And then one morning in December, with the snow piled to the windowsills and the fire crackling, and Caleb pulling on his boots to go break ice off the water trough, she put down her coffee and said, "Caleb, sit down a minute." He sat. He'd learned to listen when her voice went careful. "You made me a vow," Abby said. "In the road. The first hour you knew me with my husband's shirts in the dirt and the whole town watching." She folded her hands in her lap. "You said, and I remember it word for word, because I've turned it over 1,000 times since you said by winter, you'll have my son growing inside you, and a home no town and no rich man and no whisper on God's earth can ever take from you again." Caleb went very still. "Well?" Abby's eyes filled, and for once she let them, and she smiled through it, the first wholly unguarded smile he'd ever seen on her. "It's winter, Caleb Rourke, and you're a man who keeps his vows." For a moment he didn't understand. She watched it cross his face, the not understanding, and then the understanding, and then a thing she'd never seen on him. Never once in all the months of his quiet, steady strength, Caleb Rourke's composure broke entirely. The big man's face crumpled like a boy's, and he came up off the chair and crossed to her and dropped to his knees in front of her, the way she'd once knelt in the road, and he pressed his face against her, and his shoulders shook. "You're sure?" he said, muffled wrecked. "I'm sure." "By winter." He laughed a broken, wet sound. "I said it to scare a town off you. I said it to give you standing in that street so they couldn't run you out. I didn't even, Abby, I half made it up on the spot. The boldest thing I could think to say, to make 'em leave you be. I know you did." She put her hands in his hair. "That's what makes it the truest vow anybody ever made me. You said it to protect me before you ever loved me. You bet your whole self on a stranger in the dirt because you couldn't stand to watch her be buried. And now look." She tilted his face up to hers. "Look what the bold, made-up thing turned into. A home no one can take, and a child come summer. You didn't make up a single word of it, Caleb. You just said it before it was true, and then you went and made it true. That's not a lie. That's the bravest kind of promise there is." The boy was born the following summer in the cabin on the mountain with Martha Reed there to catch him and Caleb pacing a rut in the floorboards, and they named him Thomas. It was Caleb who said it. Abby had not dared ask. It had not wanted to lay her grief across her new joy. But Caleb, who never wasted a word and so always chose the right ones, looked at the squalling red infant in his enormous hands and said, "He ought to carry the name of a good man. You knew one once. A quiet one, you told me. Married you when others called you plain and stubborn, and loved you true, till the fever took him." He looked at his wife. "There's room in a boy for 2 fathers' worth of love, Abby. I'd be honored to share him with the man who loved you first. Call him Thomas. I'll raise him proud." And Abby Rourke wept, holding her son, and understood that she had married a man large enough to make room in his own child for the ghost of her grief, and that there was no measuring a heart like that. The breakthrough came at the harvest gathering in the new town hall they'd built, where Bramwell's burned storehouse had stood built by the town on the very ground of its worst shame. A deliberate thing, a way of saying, we were here, and we were cowards, and we won't be again. Abby almost didn't go. The mountain had become her whole world, and she was content in it, and she no longer needed the town's eyes, the way a wounded person needs them. But Martha Reed asked her, and so she went with baby Thomas on her hip and Caleb beside her down to the valley for the first harvest gathering of the new Cedar Hollow. And she walked into the middle of it happening again. There was a girl in the center of the hall, 17, maybe 18, new to the valley, a hired girl at the boarding house named Nora Tate, and she was standing white-faced with her small bundle of belongings spilled out on a table, and a man was standing over her, and the crowd had drawn into the wall. The wall. Abby knew the wall that forms when a town has decided to watch a person bleed. The man was new. His name was Harlan Voss, and he'd come to the valley that spring and bought up the boarding house and the freight contract, and 2 of the lower ranches, bought cheap, bought fast, the way a certain kind of man always arrives where another such man has just fallen, drawn to the empty throne. He had a good coat and a good watch, and a smooth, easy way of talking, and Abby's blood went cold the moment she heard it, because she had heard that voice before, in a different mouth in this same street. $40, Voss was saying, reasonable, warm, terrible. $40 gone from the boarding house strongbox, and who's been cleaning that room? But this girl, who had the key, who came to this valley 3 months ago with nothing, and now... He gestured at her poor bundle. Who's to say what's in there? She didn't earn honest. I don't want to fuss. I'm a fair man. She just leaves on the afternoon coach quiet, and we say no more about it. The afternoon coach. Abby stood frozen in the doorway, with her son on her hip, and the whole thing unspooling in front of her exactly as it had unspooled around her. The accusation with no proof, the belongings spilled out for the crowd to paw through the powerful man's warm, reasonable voice. The way out that was really a burial, and the wall of frightened faces who would not speak, and no one was speaking. The town that had built a hall on its own shame stood silent again, because the habit of fear is the oldest habit there is. And a new rich man had walked in, and they were sliding right back into it, watching a girl get buried alive by a lie, because it was easier than the other thing. The girl, Nora, looked up. Her eyes swept the crowd searching for one face that would meet hers, and found none. And Abby knew that exact searching, knew it in her bones, the moment you understand that not one soul in 100 will say your name. Abby handed her baby to Caleb. "Hold Thomas," she said. Caleb took his son. He looked at his wife's face, And he knew that look. He'd seen it in the road the first hour, and he stepped back to give her the whole room. "Mr. Voss." Her voice cut across the hall, and 100 heads turned, and the new rich man looked over at the woman who'd spoken, annoyed not yet knowing who she was. "This is town business, ma'am," he said. "Sad business. No call to involve yourself. Funny." Abby walked forward into the center, into the cleared space around the trembling girl, the same dirt and shame center where she herself had once knelt. "A man told me those exact words once, in this very street before there was a hall here. This is town business, sad business. No call to involve yourself. He was a rich man, too. He had a good coat and a good watch and a warm, reasonable voice, just like yours. And he was running a woman out of town on a lie, just like you." She stopped beside the girl. "His name was Silas Bramwell. You bought his boarding house. Did you buy his methods with it?" The hall went dead quiet. Voss's easy smile tightened. "I don't know what You said $40 is gone, and the girl had the key." Abby's voice was iron now, the voice that had stared down the devil in the street. "So I'll ask you the question nobody asked the day they threw my dead husband's shirts in the dirt of this town. Where's your proof, Mr. Voss?" She turned to the crowd as she said it to the wall of faces. "Not what you reckon. Not what you suspect. Not the easy sum a frightened mind adds up about a poor girl new to town. Where is your proof that this child took your money? Show it to us. Show it to all of us right here, right now. Because I stood where she's standing once on a lie exactly this size and not one of you." Her eyes raked the crowd, and people flinched because they all remembered. Not one of you asked that man for proof. You let him bury me. And then you built a hall on the spot to feel better about it. She let that land. Well, here's your chance to mean it. Make him prove it. Or watch yourselves do the very same thing in the very same place all over again. For a long, terrible moment, the hall hung in the balance, and Abby could feel it could go either way, the old fear or the new courage, because a town's character is not a thing you fix once. It's a thing you choose every time forever. Then Olin Pratt stepped out of the crowd. "She's right." His voice shook, but he said it. "Voss, show us the proof. We're not doing this again. Not here. Not on this ground." And then Hattie Combs. "Show us Mr. Voss." And then a rancher. And then a rancher's wife. And then Mercer Sheriff. Mercer, who'd grown into the badge in the year since, who'd never be a coward again, pushed forward through the crowd with his thumbs in his belt, and his eyes hard and level on the new rich man. "You heard the lady," Mercer said. "And you heard the town. Proof Voss, or this girl don't get on any coach. In fact," he tilted his head, "now that I think on it, $40 gone from a strong box only you and your bookkeeper can open, and you so quick to pin it on a girl who can't fight back. That's a familiar tune in this valley. We learned it the hard way. Maybe we ought to have a look at your books before that girl looks at any coach. Maybe the $40 walked off in a direction you'd rather we didn't follow." Harlan Voss's face changed. Abby saw it change, saw the warmth drain out of it, and the cold show through the same cold she'd seen under Bramwell's smile, and she saw in that flinch that Mercer had hit the truth dead center. The girl hadn't taken the money. Voss had taken it himself, or lost it, or hidden it, and reached for the oldest trick in the book to cover it. Find the weakest soul in the room and bury them under it before anyone thought to look at you. It had worked for 11 years for Bramwell. It did not work for 1 minute for Voss in the new Cedar Hollow. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "I'm a respected, you can't possibly take the word of—" "We took a widow's word over a rich man's once," Mercer said. "Turned out the widow was telling the truth and the rich man's in Helena breaking rocks. We learned our lesson, Voss. We learned it real good. So we'll have a look at those books." He nodded to Nora Tate. "You're not going anywhere, miss. Gather your things. You're staying right here in Cedar Hollow till this is settled honest, and I expect it'll settle in your favor." The girl burst into tears, and the town that changed, redeemed, no longer frightened town, did the thing it had failed to do for Abby, and would never fail to do again. It closed around the girl not to bury her, but to lift her. Hattie Combs put an arm around her. Mrs. Pruitt gathered up her spilled belongings gently, the way you'd handle something precious. And Harlan Voss stood alone in the center of the hall. The wall of the town turned against him now instead of for him. And he understood. Abby watched him, understand that he'd come to the wrong valley, that whatever he'd heard about an easy town ripe for a strong man's taking was 11 years out of date, that the seat he'd tried to climb into had been burned down to the ground, and something new built on it that he could never sit in. He left on the afternoon coach himself. 3 days later, after Mercer's look at the books, turned up exactly what everyone by then expected. Abby found Nora Tate afterward on the steps of the hall, the girl still shaking, still not quite believing. Why? Nora said the same word Abby had once said to a stranger holding his hat in a dusty road. Why did you stand up for me? You don't even know me. You had your baby on your hip and your husband beside you and a whole life up that mountain, and you put the baby down and walked into the middle of it for a girl you never met. Why? And Abby Rourke sat down on the step beside her and gave her the answer she'd been given, once the answer that had saved her own life. Because a long time ago, Abby said, I stood right where you're standing, on a lie exactly your size, and not one soul in this whole valley spoke for me. They threw my dead husband's clothes in the dirt, and they crossed the street, and they let a rich man bury me, and I learned what it is to look up at 100 faces and find not one that'll say your name. She put her hand over the girl's. And then a stranger rode down off a mountain and stood beside me when it cost him everything. He didn't know me. He just couldn't stand to watch it happen. He told me later why he said he'd watched it done to his own mother when he was a boy too small to stop it, and he'd swore he'd never stand and watch it again so long as he had 2 legs. Her voice went soft. Well, I had 2 legs today, Nora. And a voice. And I couldn't stand to watch it happen to you. That's the whole of it. That's all it ever takes. One person who won't look away. The rest of the town just needs one to go first. She squeezed the girl's hand. Today it was me. Someday it'll be you for some other frightened soul. That's how it goes. That's how it's supposed to go. We just keep passing it down the line. They rode back up the mountain that evening. The 3 of them, Caleb and Abby and baby Thomas, asleep against his father's chest, in the crook of one enormous arm, and the dust rose gold behind the horses the way it always had. But it was different dust now, and Abby knew it, and the knowing was a quiet joy in her chest. The day they'd thrown her out the dust of Cedar Hollow had been exile. It had been everything she'd lost rising up behind her as a town spat her into the wilderness. Her name, her work, her place, her whole small life. She'd ridden up this same trail a year before with a dead man's shirts and a burned name, and a stranger she had no reason on earth to trust, and the dust behind her had felt like the closing of a grave. Now she rode the same trail with her own son and her own husband, and her own name clean, restored, spoken with respect in every house in the valley, and a tin of her own money behind the flour, and a home no town, and no rich man, and no whisper on God's earth could ever take exactly as a quiet cowboy had vowed in the dirt the first hour he knew her. And the dust rising behind them now was not exile. It was the road home. It was the gold light of a free woman riding back to a life she had built with her own 2 hands and chosen with her own clear eyes, beside a man who had bet everything he owned on a stranger kneeling in the road, and won. You're quiet, Caleb said, shifting the sleeping baby. Even for you. I'm thinking about that first day, Abby said. In the road, when you got down off your horse and walked past Bramwell like he was a fence post and tipped your hat to me instead of him. She looked at her husband in the failing light. I thought you were a fool. I thought here's a great fool of a mountain man about to ruin himself over a woman he's known 4 minutes. I almost didn't get on the horse. I remember. Caleb's mouth curved. You threw my own road back in my face. Told me you'd sooner walk south than ride on my pity. And you told me pity leaves a person in the dirt, Abby said. But you were offering a road out. She reached over and laid her hand against her son's small, warm back, rising and falling with his breath. You were right, Caleb. It wasn't pity. I know that now all the way down. A man's pity would have handed me a coach fare and felt fine about itself and forgotten my name by supper. What you handed me wasn't pity, and it wasn't rescue. It was a chance to stand back up. That's all. You never once tried to save me. You just refused to let them bury me, and then you stood out of the way and let me dig myself out. Her eyes shone. And that's the only kind of love worth having. The kind that doesn't make you small to make itself feel big. The kind that stands beside you and lets you be brave. Caleb Rourke rode in silence a moment, the way he did when a thing was too large for easy words. I waited 11 years on this mountain, he said finally, for a reason to come down off it. And the day I finally did there, you were on your knees in the dirt saving a dead man's shirts. I've thanked God every day since for the timing of it. He looked at her, and then at their son, and then out at the high country going blue with evening. Folks down in that valley, they think the stories about how a cowboy saved a widow. They tell it that way. The cowboy rode back for her. Let them tell it however they like, Abby said. I aim to. Caleb smiled. Because I know the true one. The true one's about a woman they threw in the dirt who got too tired to stay down. Who knelt in a road that hated her to save the last of a man she loved. And then stood up in that same road a year later and brought a tyrant to his knees, and then stood up again in a new hall on his ashes and saved a girl she'd never met. I didn't save you, Abby. I never could have. You were never the kind that needs saving. He reached over and took her hand the way he had in the lantern light the night of the storm, the way he had every important moment since. I just had the great good luck to be the man riding by when you decided to save your own self. And I've spent every day since trying to be worth the road I happened to be standing on. Abby Rourke held her husband's hand and looked at her sleeping son, and rode up the mountain into the gold and the gathering dark of her own free life. She thought of the woman she'd been in that road a year ago on her knees, certain she was nothing. Certain a town's lie was the truth of her. Certain the dust rising behind her was the closing of her grave. She wished she could reach back through the year and tell that broken kneeling woman the one thing she knew now for certain. The thing that no town and no rich man and no whisper on God's earth could ever take from her again. They can throw you in the dirt. They can burn your name and spill your life in the road and turn 100 faces to the wall while you bleed. But the day you decide to stop staying small, the day you rise up off your knees and say the truth out loud with your own voice, no matter who's listening, no matter what it costs, that is the day they lose, and they lose forever. Because a woman who has stood up once will never again believe the lie that she was meant to stay down. Abby Whitaker had stood up, and she would never ever kneel to anyone's cruelty again.